내가 내 손에 들어오는 것들이 나한테 꼭 필요한 건지, 이게 나한테 정말 유용한 건지 이런 생각을 좀 해보면 좋겠어요. 나는 버려지는 철사에 새 삶을 주는 그리너다.
Travel creates new experiences and unforgettable memories. Through landscapes, food, scents, and textures, it awakens and satisfies our senses. The endless joy and inspiration of traveling.
The political feud only grows within the People Power Party, with its presidential candidate Kim Moon-soo colliding head-on with the party leadership over a candidacy merger with Han Dok-soo, while talks between Kim and Han once again ended with no clear results. On the other side, the Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung today campaigned with a key focus on the economy, the day after his key trial was pushed back until after the election. North Korea fired short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea earlier in the morning, with pundits raising the possibility of a pre-test of weaponry for the purpose of export to Russia. The U.S. Federal Reserve has kept its key rate steady once again, citing increasing uncertainty stemming from U.S. tariffs. It's May 8th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. The rift is only growing within the conservative bloc over a candidacy merger between PPP's Kim Moon-soo and former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo before the deadline for official candidate registration set by the election watchdog. The two met again this afternoon following yesterday's talks that fell apart, only to reaffirm their differences. For more, our correspondent Oh Soo-young is on the line. Soo-young, let's begin with their one-hour meeting, which was entirely made public.
Sure, Jung-min. Kim Moon-soo and Han Duck-soo met at 4:33 p.m. to hold their second round of talks at the National Assembly to discuss forming a joint bid for the presidential election. In a fashion unprecedented in modern Korean politics, the People Power Party candidates and ex-Prime Minister running as an independent seated themselves at an outdoor cafe table for a televised discussion. But the swap of smiles and small talk soon turned into a heated debate, which ended abruptly after an hour after they decided they couldn't narrow down their differences. Kim continuously challenged Han's relatively late entry into the race, citing his lack of participation in the PPP primary. He also criticized Han for saying he wouldn't run if they don't merge before this Sunday, when candidate registrations close, and suggested they should both run separate campaigns until a televised debate and polling next week. Han, meanwhile, stressed there is no time to lose amid pressing economic and geopolitical issues and the growing danger of the Democratic Party gaining ground. He renewed pressure on Kim not to stall the process of joining forces, saying that their union is the command of the people. He reiterated that he would do all that the PPP wants for a collaboration and put the ball in Kim's court, noting how Kim had pledged to merge with him at least 22 times in recent weeks. After emerging as the leading PPP candidate in last week's primary, Kim has resisted the party leadership's strong push to unite with Han to challenge the Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung, who currently leads the polls.
We're seeing the rift between PPP's candidate and leadership escalate also. They collided head-on this morning, which was a very unusual scene.
Yes, indeed. The PPP leadership has slammed Kim for his newfound resistance to joining forces with Han Duck-soo, suggesting a change of the party candidate hasn't been decided but is still technically possible. This came after Kim on Thursday morning accused the party elders of, quote, illegal and undemocratic moves to thwart his candidacy in favor of the former PM and rejected the party's roadmap to quickly form a union this week. Arguing that he should be the one to set the terms on a merger. Kim has further claimed that he presented a proposal to Han during the first discussion on Wednesday, but insinuated that the former PM has aligned himself with the PPP leadership. Han has denied both claims as of Thursday. Although Kim continues to revolt, the party decided it would proceed with a poll on the two candidates from 7 p.m. tonight until 4 p.m. on Friday to garner public and party opinion in a 50-50 ratio. While some PPP members, including former presidential contenders, have criticized the leadership for undermining the party's candidacy procedures, spokesperson Shin Dong-wook has justified the push for a merger, noting 87% of PPP members support a Kim-Han union before May 11th.
All right, Soo-young, thank you for your coverage. Against this backdrop, the focus of the Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung today was on the economy and people's livelihoods, hoping to expand his appeal to a broader audience. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
Economic policy was the first message Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung turned to on Thursday, just a day after clearing key legal hurdles facing him before this presidential election. He held a roundtable with leaders from 5 major business organizations, including the Korea Chamber of Commerce and the Federation of Korean Industries, highlighting his pro-business stance in a bid to win over undecided voters and widen his apparent lead in the race. He said the days of the government providing industries with direction and deciding what to do are over.
We must now place trust in the expertise and capabilities of the private sector, with the government playing a strong supporting role behind the scenes. Without this shift in approach, it will be difficult to overcome the challenges we face. In particular, I believe it's time for us to stop being a follower and to start leading the way forward.
On top of this, he emphasized that the livelihood of the people was in a dire situation. And this, to him, was the most important aspect of his campaign. He also tried to ease the concerns of the business leaders and that he won't be pushing on 4.5 workdays and that there will be plenty of discussion before this actually happens. After this, he also took to YouTube Live to meet with 4 economy, stocks, and real estate YouTubers. There, they discussed various issues as he started the conversation off saying he was a small investor as well. Meanwhile, he also responded to North Korea's multiple short-range ballistic missile launches toward the East Sea earlier on Thursday. While condemning the action, he also said it's now time to ease tension and open up inter-Korean dialogue. On top of this, he said the stalled U.S.-North Korea talks must resume. As for the upcoming official presidential election, Lee's campaign announced that it'll kick off official rallies on May 12th at Gwanghwamun Square. This is because of the site's symbolic meaning as a site of the Revolution of Light. The Democratic Party refers to the process of overcoming the December 3rd martial law and subsequent unrest as a revolution of light. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Earlier this morning, North Korea launched a series of short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea. Pundits link the latest provocation to Pyongyang possibly exporting its weapons to Russia in support of war. Kim Bo-kyung explains.
North Korea fired multiple short-range ballistic missiles toward the East Sea on Thursday, the first in around 2 months.
Our military detected multiple short-range ballistic missiles of various types launched into the East Sea from the Wonsan area in North Korea between approximately 8:10 a.m. and 9:20 a.m. today.
The missiles are believed to include the KN-23, a North Korean version of the Iskander missile, and the KN-25, a 600mm super-large multiple rocket launcher. Some flew around 250 kilometers, landing near Al Island, a rock island at the frontal waters of Gilju-gun County of Hamgyong-pukto Province, while some of the others flew 350 kilometers and fell more than 100 kilometers beyond the island. While saying such missile launches are clear acts of provocation that seriously threaten peace on the Korean peninsula, the South Korean military said it is looking into the specifics, sharing information with the U.S. and Japan. Thursday's launch is the first since early March and the second ballistic missile launch since U.S. President Donald Trump returned to the White House on January 20th. As for the reason behind such provocation amid relatively peaceful times on the peninsula, with no Seoul Washington joint drills going on, nor any strategic assets in place, one expert says he agrees with the JCS's assessment that the missile launch is to test the weaponry for export to Russia.
North Korea is focusing efforts quite strategically on weapons that could be used immediately on the battlefields of the Ukraine war, including short and medium-range missiles. It appears the regime is continuously developing and testing those that are advantageous for export.
Responding to Pyongyang's missile launch, the Presidential National Security Office held an emergency meeting to discuss the missile launch and response measures. Presided by the second deputy director, the office said the government will closely monitor North Korea's movements and maintain a full readiness posture to respond to any provocations. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Officials from the U.S. and China will be sitting down in Geneva this weekend, hoping to resolve hefty tariffs imposed on each other's products. Ahead of the event, Mr. Trump has rejected reducing levies on Beijing. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Amid escalating trade tensions between the United States and China, U.S. President Donald Trump said he won't lower his 145% tariff on Chinese imports before trade talks happen between the two countries. Speaking to reporters at the White House on Wednesday, Trump was asked if he would be open to pulling back on his tariffs in order to bring China to the negotiation table, to which he simply replied, no. The comments come as Beijing said earlier that meaningful negotiations would only happen if Washington lowers the 145% tariffs first. His comments come as a meeting between U.S. and Chinese trade officials is set to take place in Geneva on Saturday. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer are set to meet with China's economic chief He Lifeng in what could be the first step towards de-escalating tensions between the two economic powers. Speaking to Fox News earlier this week, Bessent said the trade talks will center mostly on de-escalating tensions and not on a big trade deal. Last month, President Trump raised import duties on Chinese goods to 145%, despite scaling back on his reciprocal tariffs on almost all other U.S. trading partners. China retaliated with steep tariffs on U.S. goods, further escalating the trade tensions. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has left its key interest rate unchanged yet again, a decision made at a critical time when it comes to not just the U.S. economy, but also the world economy. For more on this, our economics correspondent Lee Soo-jun joins us in the studio. Soo-jun, first, tell us about the decision and where the rates stand now.
Sure. So in its third monetary policy meeting of the year, the U.S. Fed has decided to continue its wait-and-see stance by, as you just said, keeping rates steady. The decision to keep the current key borrowing rate range of 4.25% to 4.5% on Wednesday local time extends the pause in the Federal Open Market Committee's rate-cutting cycle, which has been in place since January. Here's what Fed Chair Jerome Powell said were the reasons behind the rate freeze decision.
The risks of higher unemployment and higher inflation appear to have risen, and we believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments.
And these risks to employment and inflation, the two pillars of the Fed's dual mandate, stem from the uncertainty surrounding President Trump's tariffs. The decision to hold rates steady was thus unanimous despite weeks of pressure from Trump to lower them, resulting in him even threatening to fire Powell, which he eventually backed off of. Still, he and his administration remained firm in their stance that the Fed should cut rates, arguing that high borrowing costs are no longer needed as prices have steadily cooled. But according to one expert, while recent inflation data shows some easing, future price trends remain uncertain due to Trump's ongoing tariff threats. Let's take a listen.
The latest consumer inflation report saw a 2.4% year-over-year rise in March. The one-year outlook compiled by the University of Michigan stand at 6.5%. The main driver of the jump in inflation expectation is, President Trump's tariff policy.
Then when can we expect the Fed to lower rates?
Right, so experts actually remain divided on when this will happen, and that's because the Fed is likely to wait until it's more certain about the economic impact of tariffs, such as through economic data. Let's listen.
But the fact is that the markets hate uncertainty, and by the way, so does the Fed. So the Fed doesn't want to do anything until we get clarity, and that's going to take some time.
And this is in line with how Powell said that it, quote, depends when asked if there will be rate cuts at all this year. Tangible economic data required before the Fed cuts rates include inflation remaining relatively contained while the job market or economic growth weakens further. And according to an expert, this impact will surface in the second half, also when rate cuts are expected to begin.
They'll definitely start cutting rates in the second half. With oil prices and other factors relatively stable, inflation is starting to ease. Once that trend becomes clear, the Fed will likely move to lower rates more decisively.
And what does all this mean for the future rate policy rate decision here at home?
For one, it's expected to have quite a significant impact because the Bank of Korea closely watches the Fed's interest rate decisions. The latest rate freeze leaves the key interest rate gap between South Korea and the United States at 1.75 percentage points based on the upper end of each country's rates. And the rate gap puts the BOK in a tough position ahead of its own meeting later this month, as an even larger gap could lead to capital outflows that push the won down further, raising import costs and adding to inflation. But Korea's central bank is likely to lower interest rates due to the sluggish domestic economy. Here's what another expert said.
While the exchange rate is now in the upper 1,301 range, domestic factors are becoming more important for rate cuts. Ideally, the Fed would cut rates too, but given Korea's tough domestic situation, many expect the Bank of Korea to cut rates in May.
Data released by the central bank last month showed that the country's real gross domestic product, a key indicator of the economy, shrank by 0.2% quarter-on-quarter in the first quarter. The government has vowed to remain vigilant, as acting finance minister Kim Bum-seok said on Thursday in response to the Fed leaving rates unchanged that the government will hold weekly macroeconomic financial meetings to monitor markets and ensure economic stability.
All right, Sujin, thank you for the report.
Thank you for having me.
Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping have held their first in-person summit of the year in Moscow. Xi's visit coincides with Russia's 80th Victory Day celebrations tomorrow on Friday. The two leaders exchanged greetings, referring to one another as friend, while Putin said both countries would stand together against, quote, neo-Nazism. He also thanked Xi for inviting him to China's upcoming 80th anniversary, marking its victory over Japan in September. Xi also stressed joint efforts as major powers to counter what he called unilateralism and bullying. At the Vatican, black smoke billowed from the Sistine Chapel's chimney on the first day of the voting by cardinals to elect a new pope, meaning no consensus was made. 4 rounds of voting is slated for Thursday. Lee Yun-hee has more.
Black smoke rose from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican on Wednesday, signaling that the conclave had failed to elect a new pope on the first day. As the dark smoke curled into the night sky, a wave of disappointment swept through the crowd gathered at St. Peter's Square, many of whom have been waiting for hours.
It's an immersion. It's an immersion to be here, especially, and we will be here again tomorrow. It was expected to be black smoke today for the first vote.
The black smoke from the burning ballots came more than 3 hours after the start of the conclave, taking longer than expected. This was an hour longer than it took for smoke to appear after the first vote in the 2013 conclave that elected the late Pope Francis.
I would like it to be a pope who continues the legacy of Pope Francis, meaning that he's a more open, more liberal pope, because that is the way to attract people to the church.
To be elected, a new pope must secure at least 89 votes, a 2/3 majority. The conclave will resume on Thursday, with 133 cardinals from 70 countries voting in strict secrecy.
Yes, we'll come back tomorrow because we live here. So tomorrow from the morning, we'll be on the lookout to see if there's white smoke.
When a pope is chosen, white smoke will emerge from the chimney. Starting Thursday, the cardinals will hold 4 votes a day, 2 votes in the morning session and 2 in the afternoon. Yun-hee, Arirang News.
Pakistani officials say the country's air defense system neutralized a dozen Indian drones overnight that entered into various locations. The officials added that 4 troops were wounded by a drone that attacked a military target near Pakistan's Lahore city. No immediate comments have yet come from India. The incident follows India's missile strikes on Pakistani locations the previous day that reportedly killed at least 31 civilians. In response, Pakistan vowed retaliation, saying India would now have to pay the price for its actions. Back here in Korea, the Busan International Film Festival turns 30 this year, and when the festival opens this fall, it'll include a competition category. Cha Yoon-kyung explains the change.
The Busan International Film Festival, the first international film festival in Korea, will introduce a competition category this year, transitioning from a non-competitive showcase to a competition format in order to secure its position as a powerhouse in the Asian film landscape. Marking the 30th anniversary this year, the BIFF's committee highlighted the need for a competition section to better recognize Asia's outstanding cinema and directors. The awards will be given with trophies like world-renowned film festivals.
We have decided to create the competition section since there was a need for change in format. We thought the same patterns were repeated over and over.
The Busan International Film Festival has grown from Korea's first international film festival to Korea's largest and has become a famous film festival loved by many filmmakers and audiences alike, not only in Asia but also around the world. This year, BIFF is revamping lots of programs to coincide with its 30th anniversary. The committee plans to invite a lot more movies and increase the number of theaters this year. There will be more sessions of Midnight Passion, a selection of horror and thriller films, to keep devoted fans awake throughout the night. Various forums to discuss the problems of Korean movies and their solutions will also be held. In a notable break with tradition, the grand prize winner will screen as a festival's closing film for a grand finale. Veteran filmmaker Min Gyu-dong will oversee both the opening and closing ceremonies, promising a more dynamic presentation for the landmark edition. There was also a generational transition within the organizing committee and programmers, seeking more flexible and efficient operation. The BIFF this year will be held for 10 days from September 17th at Busan Cinema Center and other selected theaters. Cha Yoon-kyung, Arirang News. Parents' Day brought a touch of early summer warmth, great weather to spend meaningful time with family. Now we have rainy to forecast for the entire country starting early tomorrow. And we're talking about some decent downpours along with thunderstorms. Jeju could see over 200 millimeters of downpours. Southern coast could see up to 80 millimeters. The rest of the country could see 10 to 50 millimeters of showers. Then afternoon highs will be nearly 10 degrees lower than today in the capital area, and the rest of the country will also notice breezier highs. Let's check on our lows first. Seoul starts off at 15 degrees Celsius, Daegu at 13 degrees, and highs will not rise much, getting up to just 16 degrees in the capital, Daegu at 18 degrees Celsius. Then rain will bring a dip in daytime highs through Saturday with lingering rain in central areas. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.
Travel creates new experiences and unforgettable memories. Through landscapes, food, scents, and textures, it awakens and satisfies our senses. The endless joy and inspiration of traveling.
제21대 대통령 재외선거.
세계 어느 곳에 있어도
내가 국가대표라는 마음으로
누구보다 땀 흘리죠. 지금이 국가대표임을
보여줄 기회. 대한민국 국민의 권리.
대한민국 국민의 의무.
반드시 투표합니다. 국가를 위한 대통령 투표. 제21대 대통령 재외선거. 중앙선거관리위원회.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen.
As Russia prepares to mark its 80th Victory Day, attention is shifting to a key absentee, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Despite an increasingly tight military partnership with Moscow, including artillery shipments and reported troop deployments to the Ukraine front, Kim is known to be skipping the celebrations, fueling speculation over Pyongyang's diplomatic calculus. Meanwhile, tensions on the Korean peninsula are climbing again. Hours before airtime, North Korea has launched a ballistic missile into the East Sea, its first test in 2 months. Now, this coincides with a string of public military appearances by Kim, from tank factories to drone facilities, suggesting an intensified focus on deterrence and projection. To help us break down these latest developments on the Korean peninsula, we invite Ko Myung-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy, here in the studio with us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And also joining us from Washington, D.C. is Bruce Klinger, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So, let's start a discussion with Dr. Go. So, like I've said, despite growing military cooperation between North Korea and Russia, Kim Jong-un is apparently skipping Russia's 80th Victory Day celebrations only by sending his ambassador. How would you interpret this latest decision?
So it's not really that surprising, because it's not the first time that Kim Jong-un has essentially resigned the invitation to attend the Victory Day parade in Russia. It has happened before, I believe in 2015 probably. So there's a rampant speculation that Kim Jong-un will be invited to Moscow. Was invited to Moscow, but he would show up, but ultimately didn't show up. And the reason given at the time, no official reason, but the speculation was that Kim Jong-un didn't want to share the spotlight with other attendees. There are other dignitaries there, especially Chinese President Xi Jinping. And obviously, from the Russians' point of view, Xi Jinping is a much more important, interlocutor, or say as a strategic partner than North Korea, despite the fact that North Korea has provided key assistance to Russia in the ongoing war in Ukraine. So I believe one of the, the easiest answer or explanation behind Kim Jong-un's absence in the Victory Day parade in Moscow this time would be the fact that Kim Jong-un didn't want to share a spotlight with other global leaders. But on the other hand, though, I think it's surprising that it was just an ambassador who represented North Korea in the ceremony. Kim Jong-un could have sent, let's say, like nominally the second in command. But there are many potential candidates for that in North Korea. But Kim Jong-un didn't do that. So it's possible that Kim Jong-un is essentially asking Russia to extend exclusive invitation and to have a bilateral meeting between him and President Vladimir Putin in the near future, which is from North Korea's point of view, would befit the stature that North Korea deserves right now after what North Korea has done for Russia.
Right, so the regime would prefer a one-on-one dialogue style. Now, what about Dr. Klinger? You know, according to South Korea's intelligence agency, as many as 15,000 North Korean troops have been deployed to support Russia in Ukraine, with around 600 deaths and over 4,000 wounded. Given these numbers, what do you make of North Korea's decision to, keep its troops out of the Victory Day parade?
I think it's really the same reason that Dr. Go pointed out for Kim Jong-un not attending, is North Korea didn't want its importance diluted by being just one of many nations and being overshadowed by larger, more important nations such as China. So the troops would have just been part of a long line of this parade. Even nations such as Vietnam are participating. So Kim wouldn't want the importance of North Korea to be overshadowed, to be diminished by just being included as one of many nations participating. Also, the focus of the Victory Day parade is the victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. So North Korea didn't play a part of that, so really it would just be an ancillary participation. So if it were more focused on Ukraine itself, then Russia might highlight North Korea's importance and therefore Kim Jong-un or even just the North Korean troops would have been given a much more prominent position in the parade. But I think Kim didn't want himself or his troops to be just seen as one of many and much less importance. Also, if images of the Victory Day parade were, appeared in North Korea, the citizens may see it as like, well, we thought North Korea was so important given the North Korean propaganda, and yet we seem to be a small, unimportant nation compared to others.
Right, so they would really want some special kind of treatment considering their, close ties lately. Now, there are also reports, Dr. Go, that North Korea is considering granting relocation privileges to Pyongyang for the families of North Korean soldiers who were killed in Ukraine. Now, North Korea is known to be a state where, residency in the capital is a major social privilege. How could we read into this? Do you think it's a generous kind of compensation?
So I think this is essentially on a response on the part of the regime that is doing it because it cannot help it anymore. I cannot no longer essentially limit information flow into North Korea about North Korea's participation in the war and the fact that many North Korean soldiers are dying right now on foreign soil. And so clearly, I think it's an indirect indicator that there's clearly some, I would say discontent, but clearly a negative response among the North Korean public about the fact that there are so many casualties taking place fighting in a war that North Korea doesn't really have much stake in, except for the regime, obviously. So I think this is the reason why the North Korean regime is putting on the table this kind of incentive or like a compensation for the family members of the dead. But also, at the same time, I think it follows kind of naturally from the fact that the North Korean deaths, the casualties, are given the posthumous title of the Heroes of the Revolution. So it's one of the highest titles that are given to North Korean citizens. And given that title, it follows naturally that they would be granted other benefits. I think the regime essentially is now raising the ante here by sending the message to the larger public that their sacrifice will be rewarded and compensated with the highest possible compensation in North Korea right now, which is for at least for those family members who live outside of Pyongyang to move into the capital city where all the major amenities and social infrastructures are concentrated, and probably the best place to live in the country, relatively speaking.
So it definitely is kind of a reward and privilege for people living there. Now, what about Dr. Klinger? How do you think North Korea is managing its public perception of its role in the Ukraine war, especially with casualties mounting and foreign deployments becoming really undeniable?
Actually, North Korea wasn't mentioning its involvement in the Ukraine invasion, despite sending millions of artillery shells and dozens of missiles and then the 12,000 or 15,000 troops. But as Dr. Go points out, is when information is still getting into North Korea, it seemed that they could no longer deny the truth of North Korea's involvement. So that's why one of the reasons we saw the joint announcement by Moscow and Pyongyang about North Korea's troop involvement. And so once they did admit that North Korean troops were involved and then dying, then they tried to make it a patriotic issue, sort of wrapping a flag around the issue of, highlighting that this was in support of its treaty ally, Russia, that it was not only defending against Ukraine, which they depicted as Ukraine invading Russia, but also sort of broader Western forces that were inimical to North Korean, Russian, and other interests. So then by now making it a very patriotic issue, any resistance or any criticism by the citizens against it would have dire consequences. So, of course, given the very strict controls that the government has over the citizens, they can prevent or punish any kind of protests or demonstrations or even criticism. So, but now by depicting it as a very patriotic national goal, it makes it more difficult, I think, for people to protest against it.
So it really is a big thing to see, considering the number of, troops having been deployed. Now, let's also turn to the latest news, Dr. Go. Earlier today, North Korea has resumed its ballistic missile testing, which is known to be its first attempt in 2 months. And what do you make of the timing behind the latest launch?
So it seems to be like the timing for these launches are a little bit off because the United States military, also the South Korean military, have carried out a joint exercise only like a couple of weeks ago. So they usually time this kind of missile test with the joint exercises on the part of South Korea and the United States to send a message that they're developing all these missiles and even the nuclear weapons in response to the hostile posture on the part of the South Korea and the United States. So, but then this time that's not that apparently it's not the main message there for the purpose of this test. So there's a speculation that the North Koreans are essentially testing out new missiles types. These are short-range missiles, the missiles that North Korea launched last time. But then right now, what the missiles that are being used by the Russians against Ukraine tend to be short-range ballistic missiles. So in the sense that if we are allowed to speculate in this case, if the North Koreans have received new weapons technology from Russia, then perhaps North Koreans are updating their missiles and they're exporting some of them back to Russia. So if that's in the case, they need a timing and place to test out the prototypes. And it's possible that North Koreans have done this in order to advance their technology.
Right, so it's just merely, it could be just merely a checking of their new technology input. Now, the latest launch, Dr. Klinger, also comes on the heels of a flurry of domestic military activity from the North Korean leader. Kim Jong-un apparently visited major arms production sites, calling for expanded artillery production. What kind of message do you think he's sending by focusing on domestic munitions over international diplomacy during this specific time around?
Well, as with any North Korean action, whether it's missile launches or Kim Jong-un's visits, we always try to figure out if it's a signal or just sort of normal activity. And if it's a signal, is it to the domestic audience, to the international audience? So with this, in a way, it's routine activity by Kim Jong-un. He frequently visits production factories for military, either missiles or conventional weapons or even nuclear weapons. But in this case, it's also linked directly or indirectly to North Korea's involvement in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So Kim's message is the need for expanded production, particularly of artillery shells, to support its ally, Russia, in its invasion of Ukraine. And so he highlights the need, as he usually does when he visits military sites or training exercises or production facilities, the need to enhance, increase, expand North Korea's production, given the threat from either the United States, South Korea, or just more generally Western forces. So he's highlighting the need to expand production, which is already, we think, according to some reports, already 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to expand its production of artillery and missiles. But it also, I think, indirectly highlights the need to defend against the United States and South Korea in the Indo-Pacific region.
Right, so again, emphasizing its self-reliance and readiness. Now, North Korea recently, Dr. Go, has also condemned a recent U.S. Homeland Missile Defense drill in Alaska. And it says it legitimizes a preemptive nuclear strike against Pyongyang. How would you read into their latest decision?
Well, what the North Koreans are saying essentially is that the United States can neutralize the North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missiles by having a very effective missile defense system. So in a scenario in which we're talking about this from the perspective of the North Korea. So if the United States, say, launches a missile towards North Korea, and North Korea tries to respond by launching its own missile against the United States, because North Korea doesn't have an effective missile defense system, they'll be attacked and successfully by the United States, but then the North Korea's missile will be intercepted by the American missile defense system, therefore making the North Korea's missile capability essentially void and null. So North Korea is pointing out that this essentially makes the whole situation more unstable, which is clearly a propaganda move on the part of North Korea, because North Korea is right now pushing a narrative in view of a potential negotiation with the United States. North Korea wants to tell the United States that, first of all, the nuclearization of their country is off the table, it's no longer possible. So only the discussion agenda that they will consider will be for the United States to accept North Korea as a nuclear state. But in exchange, North Korea is going to ask again the United States to enter into some sort of arms control negotiation, meaning that the end product of the negotiation, so hypothetically speaking, will be for North Korea and the United States to enter into an agreement. There are many types of agreements here, but then one of the essential agreements would be to limit both sides' capability to attack each other. So North Korea is essentially looking far ahead. So it's pre-positioning their negotiation points before an actual negotiation happens, so that they can have an initiative and essentially put the United States on the defensive if negotiation happens sometimes in the future. So, and then North Koreans are doing this repeatedly to drive this point on the American side. So this is a political posturing on the part of North Korea, taking a long view. So it doesn't have to be grounded on reality. It's more about the North Korea preparing for negotiations. So that's something that we have to consider in interpreting this kind of statements coming out of the Pyongyang.
Right, so a strategic message indeed from their latest sentences. Now, the U.S. Treasury, Dr. Klinger, has blacklisted Cambodia's Huon Group for laundering billions in illicit funds, including over $50 million traced back to North Korean cyber attacks. What does this say about the role of cybercrime in sustaining the regime's which is under sanctions, and how much do you think should we be concerned about this?
Should be very concerned, because cybercrime is a major component of North Korea's strategy to evade or to reduce the impact of international sanctions imposed on it for various violations of UN resolutions or international law. In the past, many were skeptical that a small nation like North Korea could really be involved or effective in cyber hacking or cyber espionage or later cyber crime. Those days are gone. Everyone realizes that North Korea is, as U.S. intelligence says, in the top 4 nations of the world in its capability for cyber activity and cyber attacks. And cyber crime is really an update of what its previous involvement in crime activity, but it's much more profitable, much less risky than its previous criminal endeavors of counterfeiting currency or smuggling. So it's always hard to estimate the level of criminal activity, but usually it seems to be about $1 billion a year, which is a very substantial level compared to North Korea's overall foreign trade or even its GDP. Just this year, North Korea was responsible in a single cyber crime attack of gaining $1.5 billion. And that certainly enables North Korea to weather the impact of sanctions, along with all of the benefits that it's getting from Russia, food and fuel and funding. So unfortunately, the international community, including the United States, has not sufficiently enforced UN resolutions or international law, and that's enabled North Korean entities in involvement with foreign entities to evade the sanctions.
Right, so it's a very concerning situation. It really shows how far Pyongyang's cyber operations have reached and how critical the money they earned has become. Now to our last question, Dr. Go. The UN Security Council convened a meeting on May 7th to discuss, of course, North Korea's ongoing activities and also its cooperation with Russia. Now, back in 2024, Russia has vetoed the renewal of the panel of experts mandate in the UNSC, effectively shutting it down. Could you tell us how has this affected the UN's ability to track and respond to North Korea's breaches?
Well, so there are two components or two committees when it comes to sanctions, United Nations sanctions enforcement on North Korea. There's the 1874 committee, also called the panel of experts, and which was essentially dismantled by Russian veto last year. But there's also a sanctions committee called the 1718 committee. So 1718 committee, the sanctions committee, which is composed of the members of the Security Council, still remains, still effective, still working. And this is actually the committee that convened this meeting that took place yesterday. So this committee continues to work. What's lacking, though, is the public side of this work, meaning the panel of experts work. And oftentimes what the members of the panel of experts did for the sanctions committee was to gather evidence of North Korea's sanctions evasion, as well as urging the member states to implement the Security Council resolutions, as well as ensure that essentially the sanctions by the United Nations were implemented effectively. But then in practice what happened was that these members of the panel relied on the member states, especially the like-minded states that focused on sanctions on North Korea for intelligence, as well as enforcement. So in that sense, I think the member states were doing the panel's work for a long time. So the panels had become more of a, I would say, investigative arm, which could be done outside of the United Nations just as effectively. But so what happened, though? So the work in terms of quality remains very high, even without the panel of experts. But what's lacking, though, is the legitimacy of these findings. So even before, if these findings by the members of the panel had this legitimacy granted by the United Nations, that's gone. So the findings that we find, also read in the major news media or from the news broadcast, are no longer carry this weight or the value that over consensus that even countries like China and Russia essentially implicitly had agreed to. So now all these major findings by United States government, South Korea, Japan, Australia are seen as biased. So this is the biggest downside of the dismantlement of the panel of experts. But when it comes to tracking and analyzing and enforcing sanctions, that's actually still ongoing.
But even though these sanctions are ongoing, they seem to continue to breach the North Korean part.
Well, that's always happened, but it's ongoing more. It's more like a whack-a-mole kind of game, and whack-a-mole kind of game is like endless, and then this is continuing. But then overall, I believe, I'm optimistic about this, and the sanctions are essentially act as a weight, dead weight on the North Korean economy. So the North Koreans are always fighting this, and this is one of the reasons why North Koreans are putting sanction relief, one of the conditions for the negotiations.
Right, so it still gives them a lot of pressure.
Exactly.
All right, we will have to conclude our program and end our discussion right here for tonight. Thank you so much for your insights and for your time, Dr. Go.
My pleasure.
And of course, Dr. Klinger, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, that'll be all from us from Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.
"2025 celebrates the 80th anniversary of liberation. A place filled with culture, history, and diverse experiences.